A year ago, I challenged myself to draw for the first time, and I failed miserably. But as I kept drawing, my art started improving fast, until I reached this point, when I realized something was horribly wrong. Everything I had drawn up to that point was a lie. But once I discovered what was missing, my art would change forever. This is how I went from this to this in 365 days. To kickstart my art journey, I decided to draw my favorite character, Kana. I figured if I started with something I liked, I would be more motivated to improve. But she came out horribly wrong. Even with my untrained eyes, I could tell this finger was way too long. This was legitimately the first time I had held a pencil in 5 years, so I would say things can only go up from here. Since everything was so fresh, even basic things like drawing lines and circles didn't completely bore me yet. I was taking notes, researching a bunch of different things I wanted to draw, and even bought myself some new mechanical pencils just for drawing. And because everything was brand new, I was seeing massive improvements. By day 5, I had learned how to draw everything on a human head, and went from scribbling to actually drawing. This Mencho art was insane, because back then, I'd probably only drawn for 10 hours total. I've gotten so many comments talking about this drawing, which naturally boosted my confidence even more. So despite barely learning how to draw heads, I decided to move on to the body. And at first, that decision paid off. Every drawing managed to be better than the last. I was incorporating what I've learned, practicing hands and feet, and even experimenting with color, because eventually I want to create full illustrations. And as my drawings evolved, I started dedicating more time to art, averaging about 5 hours a day. And that effort led to one of the best artworks I've done so far. On day 26, I woke up feeling adventurous and decided to create my own OC, and that was when Subjohn was born. Even 1 year later, to this day, this art still holds a special place in my heart. And once I officially hit day 30, I thought this was the perfect time to test everything I have learned so far, and redrew Kana. I would say this art ended up being the best art I've made for my first 30 days. And at that moment, I thought if I kept improving at this pace, by day 100, I would be able to draw a fully rendered illustration that would be 3 times better than this art of Kana. And well, except I broke that promise the very next day. After day 30, I decided to scrub everything I've learned drawing traditionally and hopped onto digital art. At first, I completely regretted this decision. Since I was completely new to digital art, drawing on a screenless tablet felt incredibly awkward. It took me over a week just to get comfortable with it, which basically ruined my momentum. But once I finally adjusted, something interesting happened. I started improving even faster on digital than I ever did on traditional. And in order to reach my goal by day 100, I came up with a stupid yet brilliant plan that helped me improve at a record pace. One of my main weaknesses in art is definitely drawing faces, so for the next 3 weeks, I drew nothing except Kana. At first, it felt like a genius strategy, because with every Kana I drew, I kept getting better. My lines got more confident, my art actually looked much closer to the reference I was using, but eventually, there was an unsettling feeling that started creeping into my mind. What if I can only draw Kana? Thankfully, that fear didn't last long. When I tried drawing Subjohn for the first time on digital, the result proved I wasn't a Kana drawing one trick. To top it all off, on day 60, 2 months into my art journey, I managed to draw this. With this art, I thought this meant I had finally figured out how to draw faces. But back then, I didn't realize that I was making a crucial mistake that would be the start of a domino effect that would set my art progression back by months in the near future. Anyways, after this artwork of Kana, I decided to set a goal for myself to finish 1 fully rendered illustration every single week. And surprisingly, it worked. As the days went by, I was discovering something new to improve on every single day. Every master study I copied looked similar to the original. I even incorporated real-life references into my art. My confidence kept growing, and it felt like I was improving every single time I picked up my stylus. And once I officially hit day 100, it was time to put my confidence to the test. Since 100 days is a huge milestone, I decided to challenge myself to draw a character I have never drawn before. After an initial struggle, I finally decided to draw Marin, and she came out like this. For 100 days of drawing, I was really proud of the result. In my mind, this piece was definitely 3 times better than my day 30 art of Kana. At this point, I genuinely felt like I had discovered the secret formula to improving at art. Staying consistent and keep trying, and eventually I'll get better. And for a while, that seemed true. I was drawing every day, sticking to my routine of completing a fully rendered illustration every week. Naturally, my drawing speed improved as well. But there was something fundamentally flawed that I had overlooked, and it wasn't until day 200 that reality came crashing down. Even though I was spending more time drawing, my improvement started to stall. At first, it was hard to notice. I was staying on course with my game plan of finishing a full illustration every week. The drawings looked on par with my day 100 art, but I realized my actual drawing skills weren't improving anymore. It felt like my art skills had peaked. The faces I've drawn started to look the same, and no matter how much time I spent rendering, the colors still felt flat. I had no idea how to break through this wall, and it felt like everything I tried failed. Feeling dejected, I started doing a lot of style studies. Studying from artists I admire really helped me cope with my art block. Both artworks turned out really good, and I was amazed by how they looked so close to the original. But there was a problem. On day 200, I completed this artwork of Kokoro, and that's when I was forced to confront my worst nightmare. I tried using this real-life reference to complete my illustration, and my art just looks plain. When I compare my day 100 art to my day 200 art, the truth becomes painfully obvious. That's when it finally hit me. Throughout my entire 200 days, I wasn't actually learning how to draw. I was just getting really good at copying. And that left me wondering, have the last 200 days been a waste of time? Was I just getting better at completing drawings, but not better at actually understanding them? That was the moment I realized something had to change. Up until this point, my entire mindset was focused on drawing pretty, stylized anime characters and making things look good as quickly as possible. I was constantly chasing results while skipping the most important steps in art. So I went back and reviewed over 350 hours of footage from my drawing sessions and discovered something horrifying. Everything I've drawn so far was a lie. But once I fixed the simple mistakes I've been subconsciously making, I started noticing results right away. You see, this was how I used to draw faces in my first 200 days. I would start with a circle, draw a cross in the middle to connect the jaw. For facial features like the eyes, nose, and mouth, I mostly play a guessing game on where they should go. Looking at some of my artwork, you might not notice the problems at a glance. But when I reveal what lies underneath the line art, the truth becomes quite horrifying. Just look at how messy my faces are in a couple of these sketches. That's when I decided I was done drawing aimlessly and started from the ground up. At first, everything felt foreign to me. Up until this point, my drawing process was just copying shapes from whatever reference I was looking at, so I can say this was honestly my first time sitting down and really studying how to draw a proper head. Getting started in learning a new drawing technique can be challenging, which in my case is not knowing what to focus on. Thankfully, this is where Skillshare comes in. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of creative classes taught by world-class creatives like professional illustrators, renowned graphic designers, and successful entrepreneurs. It is the best place to pick up a new hobby or learn a creative skill. If you're looking to reconnect with your creativity, Skillshare is where humans come to learn from other humans. By taking a head construction class, I started learning about a loomis head and quickly noticed something confusing to me. You see this second circle? What is it? I'm being dead serious. I quickly went back and looked at my past sketches and noticed something strange. I actually used to draw this second circle, but at some point, I completely abandoned this process. You see, in order to draw heads in different angles, this second circle is really important because it indicates where the flattened side plane of the head is located. I always had trouble drawing heads in a 3/4 angle, and with Skillshare's help, I was able to understand this important concept and things started to make sense. If you are interested and want to give this a try yourself, make sure to take advantage of my unique link in the description, the pinned comment, or scan the QR code on the screen, because the first 500 people that use my link will get a month of Skillshare for free. Get started today. For the first time in my drawing journey, I felt like I was learning something. As the days flew by and my motivation at an all-time high, I also studied the arrowheads and even the skull to better understand the planes of the face. And once I understood how the head was structured, I started wondering if the same idea could apply to the rest of the body. And as it turned out, it was a game changer. Up until this point, I had been skipping bodies almost entirely. I would draw a quick shape and immediately throw clothes on top of it to hide the messy lines, so when I first started breaking down the body into the basic forms, I was in for a rude awakening. You see this round thing I'm drawing? That's supposed to be the torso. And when I went back to a couple more of my past drawings, I was stunned by what I had discovered. This entire time, I've been drawing the ribcage and pelvis as one structure, but it was supposed to be two separate structures of the body. Once I started breaking them down, it allowed me to see how the pieces work individually and how they come together as a collection of moving parts instead of one big undefined pile of mess. The torso isn't just a vague round shape that I've been using as a placeholder for clothes. It's a ribcage I can tilt in a certain direction while the pelvis tilts in another. The limbs also interact with the torso, and when I put them all together, I finally understood why artists study fundamentals. Once I understood how things were constructed on the inside, adding hair, clothes, and details on top became second nature. To challenge myself even further, I started studying realism. After 250 days of art, I never thought this day would actually come, because I've always believed that, since I'm drawing anime style, how is drawing realism going to help at all? This is why I came up with a brilliant plan of just drawing the same character over and over again. I basically avoided realism like the plague, but after seeing how much I learned from fundamentals, my mindset completely shifted. And after dedicating 2 weeks to drawing realistic heads and bodies, I wanted to see if my newfound knowledge can actually be applied to anime art. So I picked up a couple of my favorite artists and did style studies based on their work. When I started drawing this art of Huari, I quickly noticed how easy it was to draw the head. Since the character is facing a 3/4 angle, I was able to use the second circle that I learned to help me construct a nice base. When I compare my old sketches to the way I draw them now, it feels like I completely overhauled my drawing process. Not only that, but my mindset also completely shifted. In my past studies, I basically just copied everything I saw, and if a drawing looks similar to the original, I consider it good. Oftentimes, I was left with a false impression that I was improving. But now, my approach was different. While doing this study, I started asking myself, why did artists make this certain decision, and how are they implementing certain techniques? I feel like I was picking the artist's brain and trying to understand their thought process while drawing this art, and I learned a lot from doing that. Even in cop-based art study, I realized something that made drawing hair significantly easier. One thing I left out in my fundamental studies is the idea of the shape of a head being a spear rather than just a circle. Once I could visualize the head as a spear, drawing hair felt almost second nature. While looking at these completed studies, I realized my line work improved a lot. Suddenly, my lines are way cleaner and darker and have a purpose, which was something I had struggled with. You see, I used to hate doing line art. It's not because I suck at it, it's because my sketches were horrible. So it took hours, because I had to make micro adjustments to everything. If you compare the line art from an art I drew on day 220 to the line art from these newer studies, the difference is massive. The improvement wasn't in the line art itself, it was what lies beneath it. The same thing happened when I started drawing clothes. Since my sketches of the body actually have a form now, it was easy to visualize the shapes and see how clothes wrap around the forms underneath. Gone were the days of skipping the body sketch by throwing clothes on top to hide the body. Using everything I've learned so far in the past 60 days, I decided to draw Marin again to see just how much I had improved. And with his sketch, line art, and coloring, I drew my first full illustration in 2 months that wasn't just a study. And finally, my art block has been broken. The results are starting to show, and I can see visual improvements to the faces and bodies I drew. But over the next 2 weeks, while completing these 2 artworks, I just couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something was still wrong. Even though my sketches were clean, my structures were solid, the final rendering looks fine. The shading, highlights, and the colors seems to follow the forms, because I can easily tell what I'm looking at. But the longer I stared, the more the colors felt flat, and I couldn't really explain why. So I started trying everything I could think of. I used the airbrush to add more contrast to the skin. I downloaded hundreds of brushes because I thought maybe it was a brush issue. But everything I tried failed miserably, until I discovered one last missing piece that would change my art forever. Values. The truth is, I've been committing a fatal mistake for the past 300 days because of how I color. I was stunned when I converted my art into grayscale and slightly blurred it, because it becomes hard to actually tell what I'm looking at. Every feature disappears, and when I zoom out, the entire image looks like a giant blob. That's when it finally hit me. I was relying on colors to make my art readable instead of values. My art looked flat because there wasn't enough contrast to make the form readable in black and white. And to make this problem even worse, this was how I used to color. I'm not even joking. If I was doing a master study, I would rely on an eyedropper instead of picking my own colors to replicate the artwork. And yeah, even if these look good, they weren't my techniques, and the renderings weren't my decisions. So when it came time for me to apply these techniques into my own art, my colors completely fell apart because I didn't understand what I was doing. This became painfully obvious when I tried the eyedropper on real-life references. That's when I realized I wasn't actually learning how to color. I was pretending to color. So instead of copying colors, I decided to study values by painting. But here's the catch. I banned myself from using the eyedropper, and that decision gave me a harsh reality check. At first, none of my colors looked right. After more than 300 days of drawing, I couldn't replicate a simple egg. Once I realized I couldn't color without an eyedropper, I decided to simplify the next study to just 3 values and tried replicating this vase in grayscale. And honestly, I felt completely lost. Time was running out and I had only a month left before I hit 365 days. So I started distracting myself with drawing shapes. Miraculously, this was probably the best decision I've made so far. Because once I returned to painting, something felt different. I had a completely different mindset, and after painting this bell pepper in both grayscale and color, I finally understood values. When I put both of them side by side, I realized the grayscale version looked closer to the reference than the colored one. The green pepper looked longer and more tilted. This made me realize that even though the colors are correct, I was relying on colors instead of the forms to make the bell pepper stand out. And without colors to rely on, the only way I could make the grayscale version readable was through forms and contrast. I finally found my answers to why my colors look flat. So after a week of practice, it was time to see how much I actually learned and apply these techniques into anime style art. But there was a catch. Unlike my previous style studies, I would draw a completely different character. That way, I couldn't rely on the eyedropper when it came time to color. When I started drawing using this reference by Azuri, I quickly realized the effects of my value studies. I was able to see the lighting coming from the top left of the viewer, and once I determined the light source and direction, shading became so much easier. Unlike my previous studies, where I would just color pick every color and replicate the artwork, I'm now paying attention to the artist's overall composition and intent, which allowed me to draw this art of Miko. But I didn't stop here. I also revisited my Marin art and fixed the biggest problem it had. I first colored in grayscale to develop a clear light and shadow separation. When you look at my colors before I learned values, the light source seems to be coming from the viewer's top right, but there are areas that should be in shadow that have the same values as the areas being hit by light. By drawing in grayscale first, I was able to establish a clear separation between lights and shadows before adding color. This completely sped up my coloring process, and my recoloring ended up like this, which was a big step forward. With only 2 weeks left before my 1-year mark, I decided to draw Freerin to challenge myself before the big day. With a sketch and line art taking 4 hours, time flew by in a blink of an eye, but I was completely locked in. I started coloring with grayscale to establish my forms and lighting before fully committing to colors, and 18 hours later, she came out like this. I actually experienced mixed feelings for my result because this was probably the most complete artwork I had drawn so far, and part of me didn't want to peak too early. But at the same time, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Confidence. A year ago, I tried to draw Kana for the very first time. And now, with everything I had learned, I wanted to go back to where this all started. When I started drawing 365 days ago, I started without any expectations. I just wanted to draw my favorite characters and made this channel to keep track of my progress. Looking at both of these artworks side by side, I'm proud of how far I've come. Experiencing the frustrations of not improving for the first time, hitting an art block after 200 days, and finally picking up the pieces to break through was an experience I will cherish forever. On day 1, I was someone who can't draw. But now after 1 year, I can proudly say I am an artist.